Wyoming, 1879. The world had turned to white. Nothing existed beyond the swirling snow that stung Abigail Harlow's face like 1,000 tiny needles. Her breath came in ragged gasps, forming small clouds that dissipated instantly in the bitter wind. She had lost track of time, of direction, of hope itself. The gash on her forehead had stopped bleeding hours ago, the blood frozen into a dark crust that pulled at her skin. Her legs moved mechanically now, without conscious thought. One step, another, then another. She no longer felt the cold, a dangerous sign, she knew. The numbness had replaced the pain, creeping up from her toes to her ankles, to her knees. Abigail stumbled over a hidden root and fell to her knees in the deep snow. This time she lacked the strength to rise. Perhaps this was better. To rest, to sleep, to surrender to the white oblivion that promised an end to the pain, the rejection, the unbearable weight of her failure. As her eyelids grew heavy, a figure materialized before her. Not a physical presence, but a memory made flesh. Her grandmother, Clara Harlow, stood amid the swirling snow, her weathered face kind but stern, just as Abigail remembered from childhood. "Don't give up, Abby," the apparition spoke with her grandmother's voice, soft yet unyielding. "Our bloodline doesn't surrender easily. We bend, but we do not break." Abigail reached a trembling hand toward the vision, but Clara was already fading, dissolving back into the white void. In her place, something flickered in the distance. A light, small, wavering, but unmistakable. An oil lamp, its glow barely penetrating the curtain of falling snow. Real or hallucination, it hardly mattered now. With the last of her strength, Abigail pushed herself up, her frozen fingers clawing at the snow for purchase. Toward the light. One more step. Just one more. The world tilted sideways, the ground rising up to meet her. As consciousness slipped away, the light grew closer. A shadow moved within it, tall, broad-shouldered, human. The last thing Abigail saw before darkness claimed her was a pair of eyes, wary and calculating, studying her from beneath the brim of a fur-lined hat. 2 weeks earlier, Abigail had stood with her back straight and her head high in the parlor of Judge Wallace Porter's home. The room was oppressively warm, heated by a roaring fire that did nothing to thaw the ice in her husband's eyes. Harrison Reed, owner of Whispering Pines Bank and one of the town's most prominent citizens, stood by the mantelpiece, his jaw set in a hard line beneath his neatly trimmed beard. 7 years, he said, the words falling like stones in the silent room. 7 years of marriage and nothing to show for it. Abigail kept her gaze steady, though her hands trembled beneath the folds of her dress. Judge Porter sat behind his desk, his fingers steepled before him. His wife Josephine lingered in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, though Abigail thought she detected a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, in the older woman's eyes. "Dr. Fletcher has confirmed my suspicions," Harrison continued. "My wife suffers from a congenital defect. She cannot bear children. She knew this, or should have known, before our marriage." "That's not true," Abigail said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I never knew." "Silence," Judge Porter interrupted. "Mrs. Reed, you will speak when addressed directly." Abigail pressed her lips together, swallowing the protest that rose in her throat. She had known this meeting was merely a formality. The decision had been made long before she entered this room. Dr. Fletcher stepped forward from his position near the window, his thin face grave. "I've examined Mrs. Reed thoroughly. The abnormality is quite evident. In my professional opinion, she has never been capable of conceiving a child." "And this would have been apparent to her before the marriage?" Judge Porter asked. The doctor hesitated. A moment so brief, Abigail wondered if she had imagined it. "Yes, Your Honor. The symptoms would have been noticeable from her early womanhood." Another lie. Abigail had experienced monthly courses like any other woman. There had been no symptoms, no warnings, but her protestations would fall on deaf ears. Dr. Fletcher was Harrison's friend, his hunting companion, his confidant. His word was gospel in Whispering Pines. "Then I see no alternative," Judge Porter declared. "The marriage was entered into under false pretenses. Mr. Reed has grounds for annulment." Harrison nodded, a gesture of gracious acceptance that made Abigail's stomach turn. He had rehearsed this moment, she realized, practiced his expression of righteous disappointment. "Given Mrs. Reed's condition, and the deceptive nature of her actions. I believe further measures are warranted, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a concerned murmur. A woman capable of such deception is clearly unstable. For her own safety and the moral well-being of our community, I propose temporary residence at Coldwater Institute until her mental state can be properly evaluated. Coldwater, the asylum, Abigail's breath caught in her throat. The stories that emerged from that place, patients locked in ice baths, subjected to bleeding, to electrical treatments meant to restore balance to disordered minds. Harrison, please, she whispered, breaking protocol, no longer caring about decorum. Don't do this. Her husband didn't even look at her. His eyes remained fixed on Judge Porter, who nodded slowly. I believe that would be appropriate. The transfer will be arranged for Monday next. 3 days. They were giving her 3 days before they would lock her away, perhaps forever, for the crime of being barren, for failing in the one duty society deemed essential for a woman. As Abigail was led from the room, she caught a last glimpse of Josephine Porter. The woman's eyes were lowered, her hands clasped tightly before her. She made no move to intervene, to question, to object. Like everyone else in Whispering Pines, she would bear witness to Abigail's disgrace and do nothing. That night, in what had once been her home but now felt like a prison, Abigail made her decision. The servants had been instructed not to let her leave the house, but they hadn't counted on her knowledge of the old servants' staircase that led from the pantry to the back garden. With only what she could carry in a small carpet bag, a change of clothes, a few personal items, and the small wooden box of herbs that had been her grandmother's, Abigail Harlow Reed slipped away into the darkness. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond escape. The wilderness that surrounded Whispering Pines was vast and unforgiving, especially in winter. But Abigail preferred to take her chances with the mountains than face the certain horror of Coldwater Institute. As she reached the edge of town, she paused to look back at the cluster of lights that marked the place she had called home for 7 years. 7 years of trying to be the perfect wife, of enduring Harrison's growing coldness, of monthly disappointments and whispered prayers for a child that never came. From her bag, she withdrew a small object that gleamed in the moonlight, a silver maple leaf pendant on a delicate chain. It had been her grandmother's, passed to her on her wedding day. Clara Harlow had been known as a healer woman, skilled with herbs and natural remedies. Some had called her a witch, though never to her face. The pendant had been her talisman, and now it was Abigail's only inheritance. She fastened it around her neck, drawing strength from the cool metal against her skin. Then, without further hesitation, she turned her back on Whispering Pines and walked into the darkness of the forest. The oil lamp's glow grew stronger, a beacon in the whiteout conditions. Abigail's consciousness wavered, reality blurring at the edges. The figure approached cautiously, moving with the deliberate grace of a man accustomed to the treacherous footing of snow-covered forest. He stopped several paces away, raising the lamp to better see her crumpled form. In the wavering light, Abigail caught glimpses of his appearance. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face partially hidden behind a thick beard. But what struck her most were his eyes, pale blue, almost colorless in the lamplight, and filled with wary calculation. The stranger crouched beside her, his movements cautious, as if approaching a wounded animal that might either flee or attack. He made no move to help her immediately. Instead, his gaze fell to the maple leaf pendant at her throat. With careful fingers, he lifted it slightly, examining the intricate silverwork, the veins of the leaf etched with precise detail. A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or suspicion, crossed his face. Still, he made no move to speak, to offer aid or comfort. Abigail tried to form words, to ask for help, but her lips were too numb, her tongue too thick. Darkness was encroaching on her vision, the world narrowing to a small circle of lamplight and the stranger's inscrutable face. The last thing she felt before losing consciousness was being lifted in strong arms, her frozen body registering the warmth of another human being for the first time in days. The first sensation upon waking was warmth, blessed, encompassing warmth that seeped into her bones. Abigail's eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar surroundings. She lay on a narrow cot covered with fur blankets in what appeared to be a one-room cabin. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on log walls hung with dried herbs. animal skins, and shelves lined with books and glass jars. Attempting to sit up sent pains shooting through her frost-bitten extremities. A soft groan escaped her lips. "Don't move." The voice was deep, rough-edged, as if rarely used. "Your feet and hands are damaged. Moving will make it worse." The stranger from the forest sat at a rough-hewn table, stirring something in a cast-iron pot suspended over a smaller fire. He didn't look at her as he spoke, his attention fixed on his task. "Where am I?" Abigail's voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. "Safe." A pause. "For now." He rose, filling a wooden cup with the steaming liquid from the pot. Approaching her bedside with measured steps, he finally met her gaze directly. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time. A man in his mid-30s, his face weathered by exposure and marked by a jagged scar that ran from his right temple to his jawline. His dark hair and beard were shot through with premature silver. Despite the rugged appearance, his hands were unexpectedly graceful as he offered the cup. "Drink slow." Abigail accepted the cup with trembling hands. The liquid was bitter but not unpleasant, a herbal tea with flavors she recognized. Willow bark for pain, mint for stomach, and something else she couldn't identify. "Thank you," she said after several careful sips, "for finding me, for bringing me here." He merely nodded, returning to his place by the fire. After a lengthy silence, he spoke again. "The pendant, where did you get it?" His abrupt question caught her off guard. Instinctively, her hand went to the silver maple leaf still hanging around her neck. "It was my grandmother's." "Her name?" Abigail hesitated, unsure why this mattered or whether sharing such information was wise. But the man had saved her life. She owed him at least a small truth. Clara Harlow." Something flashed in his pale eyes, recognition certainly, but also something deeper. He rose abruptly, moving to a trunk in the corner of the cabin. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. He opened it to a marked page and returned to Abigail's bedside, holding the book where she could see it. On the page was a detailed sketch of a maple leaf pendant, identical to the one she wore. "Who are you?" she whispered, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature running down her spine. "Ethan Blackwood." He closed the journal with a snap. "You're from Whispering Pines." Not a question, but a statement. "How did you— Your clothes, too fine for frontier settlers. That town is the only place within 50 miles where a woman would wear such things." His gaze was penetrating, stripping away pretense. "Why were you alone in a blizzard, Mrs. Harlow?" she said quickly, the lie coming instinctively. "Abigail Harlow. I'm a widow traveling to my sister's home in Montana. I got separated from the stagecoach during the storm." Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his stance suggested he didn't believe her. He didn't press, however, merely returning the journal to the trunk. "You'll stay until you're healed. After that—" He left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. After that, she would be on her own. "I don't want to impose," Abigail began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Your feet are frostbitten. You'd die within hours if you left now. It's not a choice." With that, he returned to his position by the fire, effectively ending the conversation. Abigail sank back into the furs, exhaustion overtaking her once more. Questions whirled in her mind about this strange, solitary man, about the journal, about the pendant that seemed to connect them in some unknown way. But the herbal tea was doing its work, pulling her towards sleep. Her last conscious thought was that she had escaped one form of imprisonment only to find herself in another, albeit a warmer one. And this time, her jailer was a man who seemed to know more about her than he should. Days melted into one another as Abigail recovered in Ethan Blackwood's cabin. Her frostbite was severe, but thanks to his diligent care, would leave no permanent damage. He treated her feet and hands with a pungent salve of his own making, changing the bandages twice daily with methodical precision. He spoke little, answering direct questions with minimal words and volunteering nothing about himself. He left the cabin each morning to check traps and hunt, returning by midday with whatever game he had caught. The routine never varied, skinning and preparing the meat outside, cooking a simple stew or roast, offering her a portion before eating his own in silence. When he was gone, Abigail took the opportunity to study her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was small but efficiently arranged, with the main room serving as kitchen, dining area, and Ethan's sleeping space. A small alcove off to one side, currently occupied by Abigail, appeared to be normally used for storage. A ladder led to a small loft containing a few crates and bundles. What fascinated her most were the shelves lining one wall. Half contained books, medical texts primarily, with some volumes on botany, chemistry, and regional flora. The other half held an apothecary's dream, dozens of glass jars filled with dried herbs, powders, tinctures, and substances Abigail couldn't identify. A locked cabinet beneath the shelves presumably held more valuable or dangerous items. It was, she realized, half fortress and half laboratory, the domain of a man who valued both protection and knowledge. On her fifth day, when Abigail could finally stand without assistance, she was examining one of the jars when Ethan returned earlier than expected. She startled, nearly dropping the container of dried leaves. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was just looking." She expected anger at her intrusion, but instead Ethan's expression held a hint of curiosity. "You know what that is?" he asked, gesturing to the jar in her hands. Abigail examined the contents more carefully. "Black cohosh root. My grandmother used it for women's complaints, especially for—" She stopped, suddenly uncomfortable discussing such matters with a strange man. "For menstrual pain and to ease childbirth," Ethan finished matter-of-factly. "You know herbs." It wasn't a question, but Abigail nodded. "My grandmother taught me. She was a healer in our community before—" Again, she hesitated, wary of revealing too much. "Before they drove her out," Ethan suggested, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. Abigail's surprise must have shown on her face, for he continued, "Healing women often meet such fates. Men fear what they don't understand, especially when it comes from a woman's hands." There was a bitterness in his tone that suggested personal experience. Before Abigail could respond, he moved past her to the shelves, selecting several jars with practiced ease. "If you know herbs, you can help prepare dinner. These will improve the rabbit stew." It was the closest thing to an overture of friendship he had made. Abigail accepted the jars, recognizing thyme, sage, and what appeared to be a local mushroom variety. As they worked side by side preparing the meal, a tentative ease developed between them. "Where did you learn about plants?" she ventured, chopping the herbs with the skill of someone long accustomed to such work. Ethan was silent for so long that Abigail thought he would ignore the question. Finally, he said, "Books, initially, then experience, trial and error." "And the medical texts?" she pressed, emboldened by his response. His hands stilled momentarily over the rabbit he was sectioning. "That's enough questions for today, Mrs. Harlow." The use of her false name was pointed, a reminder that they were both keeping secrets. That night, unable to sleep, Abigail was startled by a cry from the main room. Ethan thrashed in his bedroll by the fire, caught in the grip of a nightmare. Words escaped him, fragments that made little sense individually. "Rebecca, too late, my fault." Abigail hesitated, unsure whether to wake him or let the nightmare run its course. Before she could decide, he sat up abruptly, chest heaving, eyes wide and unseeing. It took several moments before awareness returned, his gaze focusing on the dying embers of the fire. He must have sensed her watching, for he turned toward the alcove. In the dim light, their eyes met, his filled with lingering terror, hers with unwilling compassion. Neither spoke. After a moment, Ethan lay back down, turning his face to the wall. But the barrier between them had shifted, if only slightly. They were no longer simply rescuer and rescued, but two people haunted by their own ghosts. The next day, while collecting firewood, Abigail discovered a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard near her sleeping area. Inside was a leather-bound medical journal, different from the one Ethan had shown her. This one was filled with handwritten case notes, diagrams of surgical procedures, and detailed observations of patients' responses to various treatments. The handwriting was Ethan's, meticulous, educated, completely at odds with his current existence as a mountain recluse. One entry particularly caught her attention. Patient RB, female, age 26. Prolonged labor, 48 hours. Transverse presentation. Conventional methods failed. Proposed cesarean procedure denied by hospital board as experimental and dangerous. Patient expired at 3:17 a.m. Male infant stillborn at 3:42 a.m. following posthumous extraction attempt. May God forgive my failure. The entry was dated 3 years prior and signed Edua Blackwood, MD. A doctor, Ethan Blackwood was a doctor, or had been. The revelation explains so much. His knowledge of treatments, his skilled hands, the medical texts. But it raised even more questions. What had brought a trained physician to this isolated existence? And who was RB, whose death still haunted his dreams? Abigail carefully returned the journal to its hiding place, aware that she had stumbled upon something deeply private. When Ethan returned from checking his trap lines, she said nothing of her discovery. But she watched him with new eyes, seeing not just the gruff mountain man, but the educated healer beneath, a man carrying a burden of grief as heavy as her own. That night, as they shared another silent meal, Ethan abruptly asked, "Your feet are healing well. What will you do when you can walk properly?" The question caught Abigail off guard. In truth, she had been avoiding thoughts of the future, of what waited beyond the temporary sanctuary of this cabin. "Continue to my sisters, I suppose," she said, maintaining her fiction. Ethan's pale eyes studied her face. "There is no sister, is there? No stagecoach. You were running from something in Whispering Pines." It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact. Abigail lowered her gaze to her bowl, struggling to formulate a response that wasn't an outright lie, but revealed nothing of Harrison or the asylum that awaited her. "Not something," she finally said. "Someone." Ethan nodded once, accepting this partial truth without demanding more. "The wilderness is not kind to those unprepared. When your feet heal, I'll teach you what you need to know." The offer surprised her. "Why would you help me?" His eyes flickered to the maple leaf pendant at her throat. "I have my reasons." Later, when Ethan believed her asleep, Abigail watched through half-closed eyes as he removed a small wooden box from beneath his bed. Opening it, he withdrew an object identical to the sketch in his journal, a silver maple leaf pendant, twin to the one she wore. He held it in his palm for a long moment, his expression one of mingled grief and determination. Then he opened the journal she had seen before, turning to a blank page. In the flickering firelight, she saw him write a single sentence. "Find Clara Harlow in the maple leaf pendant, key to preventing the next epidemic." The entry was circled multiple times, a mission statement rather than a casual note. Below it, a new addition. "Found Abigail Harlow, granddaughter. Carries the pendant but unaware of its full significance." Abigail closed her eyes fully, her heart racing. Whatever connection existed between Ethan Blackwood and her grandmother, it was clearly significant enough to have brought this man to the wilderness and kept him there, watching and waiting. For what, she couldn't begin to guess. But one thing was certain, her lie about being a widow traveling to her sister had not fooled him for a moment. She was a mystery he intended to solve, and that made her both valuable and vulnerable in ways she was only beginning to understand. By the second week, Abigail could walk without pain, though prolonged exposure to cold still made her damaged skin ache. True to his word, Ethan began teaching her survival skills, how to identify edible plants even in winter, how to set simple snares, how to build a fire in adverse conditions. He was a stern but thorough instructor, correcting her mistakes without mockery, acknowledging her successes with brief nods that, she came to realize, were high praise from such a reserved man. One morning, as Abigail practiced skinning a rabbit, a task she found distasteful but necessary, Ethan watched from across the table, his expression thoughtful. "Your hands work like someone who's done delicate tasks before," he observed, "not the hands of a society lady." Abigail focused on her work, careful not to nick the thin membrane separating skin from meat. "My grandmother believed all women should know useful skills, regardless of station. She taught me to prepare herbs, to sew wounds when necessary." Clara Harlow sounds like an unusual woman. She was. Abigail paused, a wave of grief washing over her. "She died when I was 16. After that, I was sent to finishing school to become a proper lady, to forget the country superstitions, as my uncle called them." "But you didn't forget." Abigail shook her head. "I pretended to. It was easier. But I kept her teachings, her remedies, used them in secret when I could." Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this small confidence. He reached for his coat. "I need to check the north traps. You'll be all right alone?" I've managed to avoid burning down your home so far, she replied with a hint of humor. I think I can continue the streak. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he disappeared through the door. Alone in the cabin, Abigail completed her task and cleaned up, then turned her attention to the shelves of medical texts. She selected one on local flora, settling by the fire to read. The book was well thumbed, with handwritten annotations in the margins, observations about where certain plants grew, modifications to standard preparations, notes on effectiveness. Hours passed in comfortable solitude. The sound of approaching footsteps eventually drew her attention, too light to be Ethan's measured tread. She tensed, reaching for the skinning knife she'd left on the table. 3 sharp knocks sounded on the door, followed by a reedy voice. "Mail call, Doc. You decent in there?" Abigail hesitated, knife in hand. Should she answer? Pretend no one was home? The decision was made for her when the door creaked open a few inches, revealing an elderly man bundled against the cold, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. "Doc, got your monthly delivery and—" The man stopped abruptly upon seeing Abigail. "Well now, you're not the doc." "No," Abigail agreed, lowering the knife but keeping it within reach. "He's checking his traps. He should return soon." The old man's rheumy eyes studied her with open curiosity. "Doc's never had visitors in all the years I've been bringing his mail, especially not lady visitors." "I'm not a visitor," Abigail said, then realized how that sounded. "I mean, he found me in the storm, saved my life. I'm recovering before continuing my journey." "Uh-huh." The man's tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, since you're here, might as well give you his package. Save me the climb back up here next week." He extracted a parcel wrapped in oilcloth from his satchel, along with a sealed envelope. "Tell Doc that Ben says hello and that the fellas down at Whispering Pines are mighty curious about the smoke that's been coming from his chimney more regular-like. Folks talk, you know." Abigail's blood ran cold at the mention of Whispering Pines. You come from there?" "Nah, I circuit through, pick up mail from 3 different towns, and deliver to the outlying homesteads. Whispering Pines is just one stop." He winked. "Don't worry, miss. Your secret's safe with old Ben, whatever it might be." After the mail carrier departed, Abigail sat staring at the envelope in her hands. The return address simply read, J.P., with a post office box in St. Louis. The handwriting was feminine, elegant. A woman from Ethan's past? A wife, perhaps? The thought provoked an unexpected twinge of something that might have been jealousy, quickly dismissed as ridiculous. More concerning was Ben's casual mention of Whispering Pines. How long before Harrison's search extended to these remote cabins? How long before someone connected the missing Mrs. Reed with the woman staying at Dr. Blackwood's isolated home? When Ethan returned, he found Abigail, pale and pensive, by the fire, the unopened mail on the table beside her. "A man named Ben delivered these," she said without preamble. "He mentioned people in Whispering Pines were noticing the smoke from your chimney." Ethan's expression darkened as he examined the envelope. "What else did he say?" "That I wasn't what he expected to find here. That your secret, whatever it is, was safe with him." She met his gaze directly. "Are you hiding too, Dr. Blackwood?" The use of his title caused a visible flinch. He broke the seal on the envelope with unnecessary force, scanning its contents with a deepening frown. "They're still looking," he muttered, more to himself than to Abigail. Then, seeming to come to a decision, he held the letter out to her. "Perhaps it's time for honesty between us, Mrs. Reed." The use of her real name struck like a physical blow. "How did you—" "The entire territory knows Harrison Reed's wife has disappeared. The question is why you ran and why you're so afraid of being found." Abigail's hands trembled as she accepted the letter. The elegant handwriting filled a single page. "My dear Ethan, they continue to search, though the official story is that Mrs. Reed has gone to stay with relatives in the East. Harrison has engaged Pinkerton detectives. Be vigilant. Wallace remains ignorant of our correspondence. His health declines further. The symptoms you described in your last letter have worsened. I fear it may be the same malady that took so many in 49. Be careful with the woman should you encounter her. There is more at stake than either of you realize. With enduring hope, JP Abigail looked up, confusion and fear warring within her. You knew who I was from the beginning. You've been watching for me. Why? Ethan sighed heavily, seeming to age before her eyes. He stoked the fire, adding more logs, a man preparing for a long conversation. I was a doctor in St. Louis, he began, his voice low. Army surgeon during the war, then hospital physician after. I specialized in difficult births, developed new techniques for cases other doctors abandoned as hopeless. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a forearm marked with healed bullet wounds. Not all wounds come from battle. 3 years ago, my wife Rebecca went into labor with our first child. A difficult presentation. The baby was sideways, couldn't be turned. I proposed a cesarean section, a procedure I had performed successfully during the war. Abigail recalled the journal entry she'd found. Patient RB, female, age 26. The hospital board refused permission. Too experimental, too dangerous, they said. By the time they agreed to let me try, it was too late. Rebecca died. Our son was stillborn. His voice remained steady, but his hands shook slightly. The board needed a scapegoat. A man testified that my techniques were unsound, that I had shown reckless disregard for proper medical procedure. I lost my license. Harrison, Abigail whispered, the pieces suddenly connecting. Harrison Reed was the witness against you. Ethan's pale eyes met hers, sharp with surprise. How did you know? Because Harrison destroys whatever threatens him, or whatever he can't control. She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. I discovered discrepancies in the bank's ledgers. Customers being charged excessive interest, foreclosures on properties that should have been secure. When I confronted him, she swallowed hard. He arranged for me to be declared mentally unfit. I was to be sent to Coldwater Institute. I ran the night before they were to take me. Understanding dawned in Ethan's expression. Not because you couldn't bear children. That was the public reason, the one that would ensure no one questioned my commitment. Bitterness crept into her voice. A barren woman has no value in Whispering Pines. Harrison knew that. He used it. And the pendant, your grandmother? Abigail touched the silver maple leaf at her throat. My only inheritance. She was a healer, as I said. Some called her a witch. Clara Harlow wasn't just any healer. Ethan retrieved his journal, opening it to the sketch of the pendant. 30 years ago, an outbreak of cholera swept through this territory. Conventional doctors were helpless. But a woman with a silver maple leaf pendant developed a treatment that saved hundreds, including a settlement of Arapaho who had been abandoned by white doctors. He turned the page, revealing a map with locations marked in red ink. I've spent 3 years tracking her movements, trying to find her or her remedy. The disease is returning, different, but with similar patterns. JP, Josephine Porter, has been helping me monitor cases. Judge Porter's wife? Abigail was stunned. She sat there while they condemned me, and all the while she was secretly writing to you. Josephine has her reasons for caution. Her husband doesn't know of our correspondence. Ethan closed the journal. When I found you in the snow wearing Clara's pendant, I thought perhaps fate had finally intervened. But if you're simply her granddaughter with no knowledge of her remedy— I know her remedies, Abigail said defensively. Not all, perhaps, but many. And I have this. She retrieved her small wooden box from beside her bed, opening it to reveal dozens of carefully labeled packets of herbs and powders. Her apothecary box, everything she considered essential. Hope kindled in Ethan's eyes, the first unguarded emotion she had seen from him. May I? Abigail hesitated only briefly before nodding. As he carefully examined the contents of the box, she studied his profile, the serious line of his brow, the focused intensity of his gaze. This was not the rough mountain man she had first thought him, but a physician, a healer denied his calling. We've both been running from Harrison Reed, she said softly. Me from his control, you from his lies. Ethan looked up from the herbs, his expression softening slightly. It appears we have more in common than either of us realize, Mrs. Reed. Abigail, she corrected. If we're to be honest with each other, you should use my given name. Abigail, he agreed, and in his mouth her name sounded different somehow. Not a society woman's ornament, but a person of substance, of value beyond what Whispering Pines had decreed. Outside, the wind picked up, heralding another storm. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. Two solitary figures, each damaged by the same man, had found in each other an unexpected ally. Perhaps even the beginnings of trust. The next day dawned clear but bitterly cold, the kind of pristine winter morning where breath crystallized instantly and the snow squeaked underfoot. Ethan proposed they gather more herbal supplies, taking advantage of the break in the weather. There's a stand of white pines south of here, he explained as they trudged through knee-deep snow. The inner bark has medicinal properties, and if we're fortunate, we might find wintergreen beneath the snow. Abigail followed in his footsteps, grateful for the borrowed boots and layers of furs that protected her from the cold. Despite the lingering tenderness in her extremities, she found herself enjoying the expedition. The forest was eerily beautiful, ancient pines heavy with snow, icicles catching the sunlight like prisms, the occasional flash of wildlife darting between trees. "It's so quiet," she marveled, her voice seeming unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Most people find the silence unsettling," Ethan observed, pausing to get his bearings. "They need the constant noise of towns, of other humans." "I find it peaceful," Abigail admitted. "In Whispering Pines, there was always someone watching, judging. Here, there's just a—" She gestured at the vast expanse of white. "Freedom," Ethan supplied, the word hanging between them like a shared secret. They continued in companionable silence, Ethan occasionally pointing out tracks in the snow, rabbit, fox, the larger impressions of a moose. Abigail absorbed these lessons eagerly, storing away knowledge that might one day mean the difference between survival and starvation. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when Ethan suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop. His posture changed, alert and tense, head slightly cocked as if listening. "What is it?" Abigail whispered. "Blood," he replied, pointing to a patch of crimson staining the snow ahead. "Fresh." He moved forward cautiously, following the trail of red droplets that led deeper into the forest. Abigail stayed close behind, heart racing with apprehension. The trail ended at the base of a large pine, where a figure lay crumpled in the snow. A young Native American woman, perhaps 18 or 19, her buckskin clothing soaked with blood from a wound in her side. Ethan immediately knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. "She's alive," he reported, opening the woman's clothing to examine the injury. "Gunshot wound through and through, missed vital organs, but she's lost a lot of blood." "We need to get her warm," Abigail said, already removing her outer fur coat to wrap around the unconscious woman. "The cabin is too far. Is there shelter nearby?" Ethan nodded grimly. "A hunter's lean-to about half a mile east. Can you gather pine boughs while I carry her? We'll need them for bedding and cover." They worked with urgent efficiency, Ethan gently lifting the wounded woman while Abigail broke off branches from the lower limbs of pine trees. The lean-to proved to be little more than a crude shelter of logs and animal hides, but it provided protection from the wind. Ethan laid the woman on a bed of pine boughs, then set about starting a fire while Abigail examined the wound more closely. "Clean exit wound, which is fortunate," she reported, using snow to gently clean away dried blood. "But she'll need stitches and something to prevent infection." Ethan produced a small medical kit from his pack. He had come prepared, she realized, as if expecting to need such supplies. Together they worked to treat the young woman, Ethan handling the delicate task of suturing the wound, while Abigail prepared a poultice of white pine bark and other herbs from her grandmother's box. As they worked, Abigail found herself falling into a natural rhythm with Ethan. He would request an herb or instrument, and she would anticipate his needs, providing exactly what was required without unnecessary words. It was like a dance between experienced partners, each reading the other's movements instinctively. Hours passed before they had done all they could. The young woman now lay bundled in furs beside the fire, her wound cleaned, stitched, and dressed. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her pulse weak but regular. "Now we wait," Ethan said, wiping blood from his hands with snow. "If infection doesn't set in, she has a good chance." Abigail nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline of the emergency had sustained her, But now reactions set in, trembling hands, a lightheadedness that had nothing to do with the cold. Ethan noticed immediately. Sit, he commanded gently, guiding her to a log beside the fire. Put your head between your knees if you feel faint. I'm fine, she protested, but did as instructed. It's just, I haven't been involved in anything like this since grandmother died. I'd forgotten how it feels. The responsibility, the fear of failure, the purpose, she corrected, looking up at him. To have skills that matter, to use them to help someone who truly needs it. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes, recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who understood the calling to heal not as a profession, but as a vocation. He nodded once, a gesture that conveyed more than words could have. They maintained a vigil through the afternoon and into the evening, taking turns monitoring their patient and keeping the fire stoked. As night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep cold, they huddled close to the flames, shoulders touching out of necessity rather than design. You mentioned the war, Abigail said softly, breaking a long silence. Were you at Antietam? My cousin fought there. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Antietam, Gettysburg, too many others. I was with a field hospital unit. We moved where we were needed most. It must have been terrible. War always is. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. But as a doctor, you learn to focus on what you can save, not what you've lost. One life preserved is victory enough. Is that why you became a doctor? To save lives? A humorless smile briefly touched his lips. My father wanted me to follow him into the law. I chose medicine to defy him. But once I began my studies, I found my purpose. He glanced at their patient, checking her breathing from a distance. What about you? Why didn't you follow your grandmother's path? Abigail sighed, drawing her knees up to her chest. After she died, my uncle, my guardian, forbade it. Said it was superstitious nonsense that would make me unmarriageable. He sent me to a school where I learned to pour tea and make polite conversation instead. And then you married Reed. Then I married Harrison, she confirmed. He seemed kind at first, interested in my thoughts, my ideas. That changed after the wedding. He wanted an ornament, not a partner. And when I couldn't give him children, she trailed off, the old pains surfacing despite her best efforts. The failure wasn't yours, Ethan said quietly. Medical science increasingly suggests male factors contribute equally to childlessness, but men rarely accept such possibilities. Before Abigail could respond, a soft moan from their patient drew their attention. The young woman's eyes fluttered open, dark, intelligent eyes that darted between her caregivers with understandable wariness. Ethan moved slowly to her side, speaking in a language Abigail didn't recognize, fluid, with soft consonants and elongated vowels. The woman responded weakly in the same tongue, her gaze now fixed on Abigail with particular intensity. She's Arapaho, Ethan explained, switching back to English. Her name is Nita. She was separated from her hunting party when white trappers shot her, mistaking her for a deer, they claimed. You speak her language? Abigail asked, surprised. Enough to get by. I spent time with the Arapaho after, he hesitated, after St. Louis. They taught me much about local medicines. Abigail approached carefully, kneeling beside the wounded woman. Tell her we mean no harm, that we want to help her heal. As Ethan translated, Nita's gaze remained locked on Abigail, or more specifically, on the maple leaf pendant visible at her throat. The young woman's eyes widened, and she spoke rapidly, her hand reaching toward the silver talisman. Ethan listened intently, his expression growing increasingly surprised. When Nita finished, he turned to Abigail with newfound respect. She recognizes your pendant, he said. She says it's the symbol of she who walks between worlds, the woman who brought life back to their people when the great sickness came. Clara, Abigail whispered, touching the pendant. She never told me about the Arapaho. The pendant isn't just jewelry, Ethan explained, his voice urgent with discovery. For the Arapaho, it's a sacred symbol of healing knowledge that bridges two worlds. Your grandmother's remedy combined Western understanding of disease with native wisdom about plants that Western medicine had dismissed. That's why it worked when nothing else did. Nita spoke again, her voice stronger now, gesturing between Abigail and the pendant. She asked if you are the daughter of the maple leaf woman, come to help with the new sickness. Ethan translated. Abigail hesitated, unsure how to respond. Tell her I am Clara's granddaughter, and that I wish to help if I can, but I don't know if I have my grandmother's skills or knowledge. As Ethan conveyed this, Nita nodded solemnly, then spoke again at length. She says her people have been watching for the return of the maple leaf, that when the new sickness began appearing in isolated cases, their elders said only the heir of she who walks between worlds could prevent another great dying. Ethan's expression was grave. It appears your grandmother's legacy is more significant than either of us realized. That night, as Nita slept and Ethan kept watch, Abigail dreamed of her grandmother. In the dream, Clara stood in a forest clearing, preparing herbs with methodical precision. She looked up as if sensing Abigail's presence, her weathered face breaking into a smile. You found your way after all, dreamed Clara said, her voice exactly as Abigail remembered. Warm, slightly rough, with the cadence of someone who chose words carefully. I don't know what I'm doing, Abigail confessed. People expect me to have your knowledge, your skill, but I don't. You know more than you think, child. Clara gestured to the herbs she was preparing. Remember the fever remedy? Yellow root, bone set, white pine bark, but the secret is in the proportions and in the final ingredient. She held up a small flower Abigail didn't recognize, white with a yellow center, growing impossibly in winter. This only blooms in sacred places, where the veil between worlds is thin. Find it, and you'll have what you need. But where? You'll know when the time comes. Trust yourself, Abby. Our bloodline carries wisdom older than books, stronger than fear. Abigail woke with a start, the dream so vivid she could almost smell the herbs, feel her grandmother's presence. Beside her, Ethan dozed, his back against a log, head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Nita slept peacefully, her fever reduced, her breathing stronger. Outside, the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. A new day, and with it, the growing certainty that she had stumbled into a destiny far more complex than simply escaping Harrison Reed. The maple leaf pendant felt suddenly heavier against her skin, a legacy and a responsibility she had never anticipated. 3 days passed in the lean-to as Nita regained her strength. Abigail and Ethan took turns tending to her wound, gathering firewood, and hunting small game to sustain them. The enforced intimacy of their shared circumstances eroded more barriers between them. Ethan spoke more freely now, sometimes even offering fragments of his past, his childhood in Boston, his medical training, the horrors and triumphs of battlefield surgery. Abigail, too, found herself sharing more, stories of Clara's healing work, the herbs and remedies she remembered, the gradual suppression of her true nature during her years in Whispering Pines. Each confidence exchanged was like a small stone added to the foundation of trust building between them. On the fourth morning, as Abigail changed Nita's bandage, they heard movement outside, the crunch of multiple footsteps in snow, low voices speaking in Arapaho. Ethan moved to the entrance, hand on the rifle he kept nearby, but his posture relaxed as he recognized the newcomers. Her family, he explained to Abigail. They've been searching. 6 Arapaho men and women entered the small shelter, their faces etched with concern that transformed to relief when they saw Nita alive and alert. The oldest man, his long hair streaked with gray, spoke at length to Ethan, gesturing toward Nita and then to Abigail. He thanks us for saving his daughter's life, Ethan translated. He says the spirits guided us to find her. The man then approached Abigail directly, his dark eyes focusing on the maple leaf pendant. He touched it gently, then spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of formal declaration. He says you are welcome among the people. You wear the symbol of she who walks between worlds, and you have proven worthy of it by saving his child. One of the women stepped forward, offering a small pouch of finely tanned deerskin to Abigail. Inside was a collection of dried herbs and roots, some familiar, others unlike any she had seen before. A gift, Ethan translated the woman's explanation. Medicines that grow only in their sacred places. She says your grandmother would understand their value. The old man spoke again, this time at greater length, his expression solemn. He invites us to their winter camp, Ethan said, surprise evident in his voice. This is unusual. The Arapaho rarely welcome outsiders, especially now with tensions high between settlers and native peoples. Abigail looked to Nita, who nodded encouragingly, then back to the old man. Please tell him we are honored by his invitation. We would be grateful to learn from his people. As Ethan translated, the old man smiled, revealing teeth worn from years of use. He spoke a few more words before helping his daughter to her feet. He says it is not us learning from them, but a reunion of old knowledge. The maple leaf returns when it is needed most. The journey to the Arapaho winter camp took most of the day. Nita rode on a travois pulled by her father, while Abigail and Ethan walked alongside the small party. As they traveled, Abigail noticed how Ethan seemed to transform, his posture more relaxed, his communication with the Arapaho flowing naturally, as if he had found a place where his dual nature as healer and wilderness survivor was fully accepted. You've spent considerable time with them, she observed during a brief rest. Ethan nodded, watching as the Arapaho men checked Nita's comfort on the travois. After St. Louis, after Rebecca, I wandered, had no purpose. An Arapaho hunting party found me half dead from exposure and starvation. They could have left me, many would have, given the history between our peoples. Instead, they took me to their medicine man. Who healed you? Not just my body. Ethan's gaze turned distant. They have a concept, honihiu, the way of balance. They taught me to see my loss not as an end, but as part of a greater cycle. And that helped? It gave me purpose again. I began documenting their medicinal knowledge, combining it with my Western training. A rare smile softened his features. That's how I first heard the legend of the Maple Leaf Woman. Your grandmother's work with the Arapaho during the epidemic became part of their oral tradition. The winter camp was situated in a protected valley, sheltered from harsh winds by surrounding hills and stands of ancient pine. 24 lodges formed a rough circle around a central fire pit, with horses corralled nearby. As they approached, children ran to meet them, their curiosity about the white visitors evident in their wide eyes and excited chatter. The old man, whom Ethan identified as Chief Painted Horse, led them to a large lodge at the center of the camp. Inside, furs lined the floor, and a central fire cast a warm glow on painted hides that decorated the walls. They were offered places of honor on woven mats, and soon elders from the tribe joined them, creating a circle around the fire. A feast was prepared in celebration of Nita's return and in honor of their guests. As they ate, an elderly woman with deeply lined features studied Abigail with unnerving intensity. Finally, she spoke, her voice cracked with age but commanding respect. Grandmother Owl Woman wishes to speak with you privately, Ethan translated. She is their oldest medicine woman, a keeper of stories. Abigail followed the ancient healer to a smaller lodge nearby, where bundles of herbs hung from the center pole and the air was thick with the scent of sage and sweetgrass. Owl Woman gestured for Abigail to sit, then settled across from her, the fire between them casting dancing shadows on her wrinkled face. For several minutes, the old woman simply observed Abigail, her dark eyes seeming to look through flesh to the spirit beneath. Then she began to speak, her voice rising and falling in the cadence of a storyteller. Though Abigail couldn't understand the words, the rhythm held her captive. When Owl Woman finished, she reached out with gnarled fingers to touch the maple leaf pendant, nodding as if confirming something to herself. From a pouch at her waist, she withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather, offering it to Abigail with evident reverence. Unwrapping it carefully, Abigail found a miniature carving of a maple leaf in pale stone, identical in design to her silver pendant, but clearly much older. Owl Woman spoke again, making a connecting gesture between the stone leaf and Abigail's silver one. When Ethan later translated the medicine woman's story, Abigail listened with growing wonder. According to Owl Woman, the stone leaf had been carved generations earlier, when a vision showed an Arapaho medicine woman that help would come from a stranger wearing this symbol when a great sickness threatened the tribe. When the first epidemic came, your grandmother appeared wearing the silver version of their sacred symbol, Ethan explained. They believed she was the fulfillment of their prophecy. Her medicine saved hundreds of lives. But why didn't she ever speak of this? Abigail wondered. Owl Woman says Clara understood the danger of such knowledge in the white man's world, that she protected both you and the Arapaho by keeping her connection to them secret. Ethan's expression was grave. She also warned of something else, a man with eyes the color of winter sky who seeks the maple leaf for his own purposes. Harrison, Abigail whispered, a chill running down her spine despite the warmth of the lodge. His eyes are pale gray, almost colorless. Owl Woman believes he seeks not just you, but the medicine itself. She says the sickness is returning, different but familiar, and that Harrison Reed knows this. Ethan's voice dropped lower. She believes he wants to control the cure, to profit from suffering rather than end it. The idea was horrifying, but not implausible. Harrison had always valued profit above all else. If he had somehow learned of Clara's remedy and its potential value in the face of a new epidemic. How could he know about any of this? Abigail asked. Clara died years before I met him. I don't know, Ethan admitted, but Owl Woman seems certain. She said to warn you that the gray-eyed one walks two paths, that he is not what he seems. Abigail shivered, remembering the calculating coldness that had sometimes flashed beneath Harrison's charming facade. Had there been signs she'd missed? Clues to a deeper agenda behind his courting of the granddaughter of a renowned healer? That night, as they slept in the lodge provided for them, Abigail lay awake, turning these revelations over in her mind. The responsibility settling on her shoulders felt overwhelming. She was not Clara, had not her grandmother's decades of experience, her deep knowledge of both Western and native healing traditions. How could she possibly fulfill the expectations being placed upon her? Beside her, Ethan slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring Rebecca's name or other indistinguishable words. Even in sleep, he carried his burdens. Yet he had found purpose again after devastating loss. Perhaps she could do the same. With that thought, Abigail finally drifted into uneasy slumber, the stone maple leaf clutched in her palm like a talisman against the darkness. Their return journey to Ethan's cabin began at dawn, accompanied by two Arapaho men who would guide them through a faster route than they had taken originally. The tribe had provided them with additional supplies, dried meat, furs, and most precious of all, a selection of medicinal herbs that Owl Woman insisted Abigail would need in the days ahead. As they traveled, Ethan shared more of what he had learned about the approaching disease. From Josephine's letters and the Arapaho accounts, it appears similar to the cholera epidemic of 30 years ago, but with differences. The symptoms begin the same: severe diarrhea, vomiting, extreme thirst, but then develop into a high fever and skin lesions that the previous outbreak didn't feature. That suggests a different pathogen, or perhaps a mutation of the original, Abigail mused, drawing on the medical knowledge she had absorbed from Clara's books and Ethan's explanations. Exactly, which is why finding your grandmother's remedy is crucial. If she develops something effective against the original disease, it might be adaptable to this new variant. By mid-afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking Ethan's cabin. One of their Arapaho guides suddenly raised his hand in warning, pointing to thin trails of smoke rising from the cabin's chimney. Someone's there, Ethan murmured, unslinging his rifle. Stay here with our guides. I'll investigate. No, Abigail countered firmly. We go together. If it's Harrison or his men, I need to know. After a brief argument, Ethan reluctantly agreed, though he insisted she stay behind him as they approached the cabin cautiously. The Arapaho men melted into the forest, circling to approach from different angles, a tactical move that suggested they were no strangers to conflict. As they neared the cabin, they heard a strange sound, a high-pitched, pained whimpering coming from inside. Ethan exchanged a puzzled glance with Abigail. Not a human sound, certainly. With rifle raised, Ethan pushed open the door. The cabin appeared ransacked, books pulled from shelves, jars overturned, Ethan's trunk of personal possessions upended. And in the corner, caught in a steel trap clearly meant for larger game, was a young wolf pup, its front paw mangled in the cruel metal teeth. Oh! Abigail pushed past Ethan, rushing to the wounded animal. The pup snarled weakly, more from fear than aggression. Who would do this? Set a trap inside your home? Ethan surveyed the destruction grimly. Someone sending a message. The medicinal herbs are gone, only the common ones left behind. And this. He held up a page torn from his journal, where a crude drawing of a hanging man had been sketched. A warning, I think, or a promise. While Ethan secured the cabin, checking for other traps or intruders, Abigail focused on freeing the wolf pup. The trap was cruelly efficient, and the animal's struggles had only worsened its injury. With gentle words and careful movements, she managed to release the spring mechanism, easing the steel jaws open. Easy, little one, she murmured, lifting the trembling creature into her lap. "Let me see what they have done to you." The pup's paw was badly damaged, bone exposed, flesh torn. A normal doctor might have recommended putting the animal down or at best amputation, but Clara had taught Abigail that healing sometimes required looking beyond conventional wisdom. "Ethan," she called, "I need whatever medical supplies weren't taken, and pine resin if you have it." Together they worked to clean and treat the pup's wound, Ethan's surgical precision complementing Abigail's knowledge of herbal poultices. The young wolf eventually stopped struggling, whether from exhaustion or some animal understanding that they were trying to help, Abigail couldn't say. "He'll lose some function in that paw," Ethan assessed, wrapping the limb in clean bandages. "But he might keep it, with proper care." "He'll stay with us then," Abigail decided, stroking the pup's gray fur, "until he's healed enough to return to the wild." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A wolf isn't a pet, Abigail. He's a wild predator, even injured and young. I'm not suggesting we tame him, just that we have a responsibility to undo the harm caused by human cruelty." She met his skeptical gaze steadily. "Besides, wolves mate for life and form strong pack bonds. He's too young to survive alone, and we don't know what happened to his family." Ethan shook his head, but there was a hint of admiration in his expression. "You don't give up easily, do you?" "Would you have preferred I gave up when you found me half frozen in the snow?" she countered. A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "Point taken, but he's your responsibility, and he needs a name, I suppose." Abigail looked down at the wolf pup, now sleeping from the effects of the herbal sedative they had administered. In the fading light, his gray fur appeared almost black, like a shadow against the cabin floor. "Shadow," she decided. "His name is Shadow." As night fell, they worked to restore order to the cabin, taking inventory of what had been taken and what remained. The most valuable medical texts were gone, along with specific herbs that featured in Clara's remedies. Ethan's personal journal had been rifled through, certain pages torn out, those detailing his research into the previous epidemic and Clara's connection to it. "This wasn't random," Ethan concluded, sitting heavily by the fire. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for." Abigail nodded, cradling the sleeping wolf pup in her lap. "Harrison, it has to be. But how would he know about Clara's remedy? About your research?" "Perhaps the same way he knew to testify against me in St. Louis." Ethan's expression darkened. "Harrison Reed has connections, powerful ones. Banking gives him access to information, to secrets. Perhaps he learned about Clara's work during the epidemic, recognized its potential value, and then sought out her granddaughter," Abigail whispered, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. "My uncle arranged our introduction. I always wondered why Harrison Reed, wealthy and eligible, would be interested in a country girl with modest means." "He wanted access to Clara's knowledge through you," Ethan concluded. "And when you didn't possess what he sought, or perhaps when you discovered his bank fraud, you became a liability, one he intended to silence permanently in Coldwater Institute." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Harrison was not merely a controlling husband or a fraudulent banker. He was something far more dangerous, a man willing to destroy lives for profit, to view human suffering as an opportunity rather than a tragedy to be alleviated. "We need to move," Ethan said decisively. "This location is compromised. There's another shelter higher in the mountains, more defensible, known only to me and a few Arapaho." "When?" Abigail asked, already mentally preparing for another journey. "Tomorrow, first light." Ethan's gaze softened as it fell on Shadow. "Can your patient travel?" "I'll carry him if necessary," she replied firmly. Ethan nodded, then hesitated, as if struggling with a decision. Finally, he moved to the hearth, prying loose a stone to reveal a hidden compartment. From it, he withdrew a leather folder tied with string. "There's something you should know," he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "About Rebecca, about why I was so determined to find Clara's remedy." He untied the folder, spreading its contents on the table. Medical illustrations, case notes, letters. Rebecca's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the loss of a brilliant medical mind. She was researching disease transmission, developing theories decades ahead of her time. Abigail examined the papers with growing wonder. The handwriting was feminine but precise, the diagrams meticulously detailed. She was a doctor? Not officially. No medical school would admit her, but she studied independently, assisted in my practice. Her insights into the cholera epidemic were revolutionary. Pride mingled with grief in his voice. She theorized that Clara's remedy worked not just because of the herbal components, but because of how they were prepared and administered, a method that prevented further contamination. That's why you've been searching for Clara's specific techniques, Abigail realized. Not just the ingredients. Ethan nodded. Rebecca believed combining this knowledge with modern medical understanding could prevent future epidemics. Her work died with her, or so I thought, until I began hearing reports of a new outbreak. I couldn't save her, but I thought perhaps I could continue her work, honor her memory by saving others. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Abigail reached across the table, covering his hand with hers, a gesture of understanding rather than mere sympathy. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply, "for trusting me with her memory." Something shifted in Ethan's eyes, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. For a moment, it seemed he might turn his hand to clasp hers, might allow that simple human connection. Instead, he gently withdrew, rising to stoke the fire. "We should rest while we can," he said, his tone once again the practical doctor rather than the grieving widower. "Tomorrow will be challenging." As Abigail settled into her sleeping area, shadow curled against her side, she reflected on this new dimension of Ethan Blackwood. He was not merely running from his past, as she had initially thought, but running towards something, a purpose, a redemption, a way to give meaning to unbearable loss. In that, perhaps, they were more alike than different. She too was seeking a way to transform the painful circumstances of her life into something meaningful. To become not just a fugitive from Harrison's control, but a woman with agency, with value beyond the narrow confines society had prescribed for her. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of Clara mixing herbs with methodical precision, of Rebecca bent over medical texts, of Harrison watching from the shadows with his pale, calculating eyes. And through it all, the silver maple leaf gleaming like a beacon, guiding her toward a destiny she was only beginning to comprehend. Dawn broke with the muted colors of winter, pale pinks and golds, struggling through a sky heavy with the promise of more snow. Abigail woke to find Ethan already up, packing essentials into 2 rucksacks. Shadow lay by the dying fire, his injured paw carefully rebandaged, alert eyes following Ethan's movements. "The wolf let me tend his wound," Ethan explained, noticing her surprise. "Seems to understand we're helping him." Abigail smiled, crossing to kneel beside Shadow. The pup's eyes met hers with an intelligence that seemed beyond mere animal instinct. When she gently stroked his head, he leaned into her touch rather than shying away. "He knows who his friends are," she said softly. "How far is this other shelter?" "A day's journey in good weather, longer in snow." Ethan handed her a cup of hot tea and a piece of journey bread. "Eat. We need to leave within the hour." As they prepared for departure, a sharp knock at the door froze them both. Ethan motioned for Abigail to stay back, positioning himself with a rifle in hand. "Who's there?" he called, tension evident in every line of his body. "Just old Ben, Doc. Got your monthly delivery." Ethan relaxed marginally, though he kept the rifle ready as he opened the door to admit the elderly mail carrier they had met previously. Ben stomped snow from his boots, his rheumy eyes widening at the disarray still evident in the cabin. "Lord Almighty, Doc, what happened here? Looks like a bear got loose in your parlor." "Something like that," Ethan replied noncommittally. "What brings you up the mountain so soon after your last visit?" Ben produced a sealed envelope from his satchel. "Special delivery. Lady down in Whispering Pines paid extra to have this brought to you immediate like. Seemed right anxious about it." Ethan accepted the letter, examining the handwriting with a frown. It was addressed simply to Dr. E. Blackwood, but the script was unfamiliar, not Josephine's elegant hand. "This lady," Abigail asked carefully, "what did she look like?" Ben scratched his whiskered chin thoughtfully. "Young thing, pretty in a quiet way, dark hair, big eyes, nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Said her name was Sarah or some such." Abigail exchanged a puzzled glance with Ethan. She knew no Sarah in Whispering Pines who would have cause to write to Ethan. There's more, Ben continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Town's all astir. Seems there's a sickness going around. Doc Fletcher's been run ragged, and them Pinkerton detectives are still asking questions about Harrison Reed's missing wife. He winked at Abigail. Told you your secret was safe with old Ben. Ain't said a word about the pretty lady staying at Doc Blackwood's place. We appreciate your discretion, Ethan said dryly, pressing a coin into Ben's palm. Anything else we should know? Just that there's a new fellow in town. Hunter named Miller. Been asking questions about cabins in the high country, offering good money for guides. Ben's expression turned serious. I didn't tell him nothing, Doc, but others might not be so tight-lipped, especially with the bounty he's offering. Bounty? Abigail echoed, alarm rising in her throat. For information leading to Mrs. Reed. Ben shook his head disapprovingly. Reed's claiming she stole money from the bank before she ran. $500 for whoever helps catch her. That's a powerful lot of money in these parts. After Ben departed with a promise to forget he'd seen them preparing to leave, Ethan tore open the mysterious letter. His expression grew increasingly grave as he read. It's from Josephine Porter's maid, Sarah, he explained, handing the letter to Abigail. Josephine is too ill to write herself. The sickness has reached Whispering Pines, just as we feared. Abigail scanned the neat, if somewhat unsophisticated handwriting. Dr. Blackwood, Mistress Porter is taken sick with the fever. Doc Fletcher says it's the same that's been reported in other settlements. She made me promise to write you and tell you that the remedy you seek is urgently needed. 5 dead already in town, more ailing. Mr. Reed returned from his trip 3 days ago. He meets often with Doc Fletcher and Judge Porter. Mistress says to warn you that Reed knows about the woman with the maple leaf pendant. He has men searching the mountains. Mistress also says to tell you that Judge Porter has been examining old records from the '49 epidemic. He found something about Clara Harlow that upset him greatly. Please hurry with the medicine if you can. Mistress Porter grows weaker each day. Faithfully, Sarah Wilkins, 5 dead already, Abigail murmured, the gravity of the situation sinking in. And Harrison is working with Judge Porter and Dr. Fletcher. A powerful alliance, Ethan agreed grimly. The law, medicine, and money united. And now they're actively searching for us. What could Judge Porter have found about Clara? And why would it upset him? Ethan shook his head. I don't know, but it reinforces the need to move quickly. This Miller person Ben mentioned, he's likely one of the men Harrison has hired to find you. They resumed packing with renewed urgency, selecting only what was essential. Medical supplies, food, Clara's herb box, Ethan's remaining research materials. Abigail fashioned a sling to carry Shadow, who watched their preparations with alert interest. As they were preparing to leave, a movement outside the window caught Abigail's attention, a figure moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing. Ethan, she whispered, pointing. He moved silently to the window, rifle ready. Single tracker, not Arapaho, wrong clothing. His expression hardened. One of Miller's men, most likely. What do we do? Change of plans. We can't risk leading them to the upper shelter. Ethan thought for a moment. There's a hunting blind about 2 miles west. We'll go there, wait until dark, then double back on our trail and head east instead. They slipped out the back of the cabin, using the cover of pine trees to mask their departure. Ethan led the way, moving with the silent efficiency of a man accustomed to navigating wilderness undetected. Abigail followed, one hand steadying Shadow in his sling, the other clutching the strap of her pack. The weight of Clara's herb box pressed against her back, a physical reminder of the responsibility she carried. For hours, they moved through the forest, Ethan occasionally doubling back to check for pursuit or creating false trails to confuse any trackers. By mid-afternoon, they reached the hunting blind, little more than a crude shelter of branches and hides, designed to conceal hunters from their prey. Rest, Ethan instructed, keeping his voice low. I'll keep watch. Abigail sank gratefully onto a bed of pine boughs, easing Shadow from his sling. The pup's wound needed attention. The bandage was soaked through with both blood and melted snow. As she carefully cleaned and redressed it, using herbs from Clara's box, she spoke softly to distract both herself and Shadow from the discomfort. You're being very brave, she murmured. Much braver than I was when Ethan found me. I was half dead and entirely useless. I wouldn't say useless, Ethan commented from his position near the entrance. Stubborn, perhaps, secretive, certainly, but never useless. Abigail glanced up, surprised by the almost teasing quality in his voice. High praise coming from a man who communicates primarily in grunts and nods. A smile briefly illuminated his features, a rare sight that transformed his face, softening the hard lines carved by grief and solitude. Rebecca used to say the same, that I spoke more with my eyebrows than my mouth. The casual mention of his late wife, not in pain or formality, but in fond remembrance, marked a significant shift. Abigail tied off Shadow's bandage, considering her response carefully. She sounds like a remarkable woman, she said finally. I wish I could have known her. She would have liked you, Ethan replied quietly. Your determination, your willingness to challenge conventions. He paused, his gaze distant. When I found you in the snow, wearing Clara's pendant, I thought perhaps... He shook his head, leaving the thought unfinished. Perhaps what? That fate had a strange sense of humor. Or justice, perhaps. He met her eyes directly. Rebecca's last coherent words were about your grandmother's work. She made me promise to find Clara Harlow, to continue their research together. And then I find you instead, Clara's heir in both blood and spirit. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. In the small confines of the hunting blind, Abigail was acutely aware of his presence. The steady rhythm of his breathing, the subtle scent of pine and leather that seemed to cling to him, the intensity of his pale gaze. Shadow whined softly, breaking the spell. Ethan cleared his throat, returning his attention to the forest beyond their shelter. We should move again at dusk, he said, his tone once more practical and measured. There's a cave system to the east, better protection, more difficult to approach unseen. Abigail nodded, though he wasn't looking at her to see it. The moment, whatever it had been, had passed. Yet something had changed between them, a tentative bridge spanning the separate islands of their pain. As dusk approached, they prepared to move again. Ethan had just shouldered his pack when the sound of voices drifted through the trees, men calling to each other, at least 3 or 4 of them, and close. Down, Ethan hissed, pulling Abigail into a crouch. Shadow, sensing the tension, remained perfectly still in his sling. Through gaps in the hunting blind, they could see figures moving through the forest, men in heavy winter clothing, carrying rifles and following what appeared to be their trail. They're good, Ethan whispered, a note of professional respect in his voice. We can't outrun them, not in the open. What then? Abigail whispered back, heart pounding. Before Ethan could answer, one of the men called out, his voice carrying clearly through the winter air. Mrs. Reed, Dr. Blackwood, we know you're nearby. There's no need to run. Abigail froze, recognizing the voice instantly. That's Thomas Miller, she breathed. He's a trapper who sometimes sold pelts to Harrison's bank. Ethan's expression darkened. The same Miller Ben mentioned in, Harrison has hired someone who knows you, who might gain your trust. Mrs. Reed, Miller called again. I'm here to help you. Your husband has been arrested for bank fraud. It's safe to come home now. The claim was so unexpected that Abigail almost gasped aloud. Harrison arrested, it seemed impossible. He had too much influence, too many powerful friends. It's a trap, Ethan murmured, as if reading her thoughts. They're trying to lure you out. Dr. Blackwood, Miller continued, his voice moving closer. Judge Porter needs your medical expertise. There's sickness in town, and Doc Fletcher can't manage alone. No one's looking to cause you trouble, sir, just to bring you back where you're needed. Ethan's jaw tightened, but Abigail saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The appeal to his physician's oath to help those suffering was cleverly calculated. Don't listen, she whispered, placing a restraining hand on his arm. Remember what Josephine wrote. Harrison is working with Porter and Fletcher. This is his doing. For a tense moment, Ethan seemed torn between the ingrained duty to respond to medical need and his well-founded suspicion. Then Shadow shifted in his sling, pressing closer to Abigail, and Ethan's expression cleared. You're right, he murmured. We wait until they pass, then move in the opposite direction. Hours crept by as they remained motionless in the blind, listening as Miller and his men searched the surrounding area. Eventually, the voices grew distant, moving west, following the false trail Ethan had cleverly laid earlier. Under cover of full darkness, they finally emerged, moving east through the moonlit forest. Shadow remarkably remained quiet in his sling, as if understanding the need for stealth. By midnight, they reached the cave system Ethan had mentioned, a series of interconnected chambers set into a rocky hillside, the entrance partially concealed by a waterfall, now frozen into a curtain of ice. Inside, the temperature was more moderate, the stone walls providing insulation against the bitter cold. Ethan built a small fire in a chamber far enough from the entrance that the light wouldn't be visible outside. In its warm glow, they finally allowed themselves to relax marginally, sharing a sparse meal of dried meat and journey bread. Miller's men will continue searching, Ethan said, breaking a long silence. But they won't find this place easily. Few know of its existence. Who does know? Abigail asked, stroking Shadow's fur as the pup dozed beside her. Some Arapaho, a few mountain men I've traded with. Josephine Porter. He hesitated. And Clara Harlow. Abigail's hand stilled. My grandmother knew of this place? Ethan nodded slowly. This cave holds special significance, Ethan explained. According to the Arapaho, this is a sacred place where the physical and spiritual worlds intersect. When the epidemic struck, Clara didn't just borrow their knowledge. She became part of their community. They brought her here to this medicine cave, where their most powerful healing rituals had been performed for generations. Together, they developed the remedy that saved hundreds. The Arapaho didn't just see her as a white healer using their plants. They recognized her as someone whose spirit understood the balance between worlds, science, and intuition, visible and invisible. That's why they gave her the title She Who Walks Between Worlds, and why the maple leaf symbol became sacred to them. A memory stirred in Abigail's mind, her dream of Clara, showing her an unfamiliar white flower and saying it only grew where the veil between worlds is thin. A coincidence or something more? Ethan, she said carefully, in these caves, does a small white flower grow with a yellow center? His eyes widened slightly. How did you know that? The Arapaho call it ghost flower. It blooms even in winter, but only here and a few other sacred sites. Excitement coursed through Abigail. That's it, the final ingredient in Clara's fever remedy. She showed me in a dream, but I didn't understand the significance until now. Skepticism flickered across Ethan's features. A dream told you about a flower you've never seen? Not just a dream, Abigail insisted. A memory, perhaps, or something Clara left within me, waiting for the right moment. She leaned forward earnestly. You've lived with the Arapaho. You know they believe knowledge can come through dreams, through connections that Western medicine doesn't recognize. Ethan was silent for a long moment, weighing her words against his scientific training. Finally, he nodded. Rebecca would say I'm a fool to dismiss what I don't understand. If Clara showed you this flower, then tomorrow we'll search for it. Abigail smiled, relief washing through her. He believed her, or at least was willing to consider possibilities beyond his medical training. It was a significant concession from a man who had devoted his life to scientific principles. As the fire burned down to embers, casting the cave in soft shadow, Abigail found herself watching Ethan's profile. The strong line of his jaw beneath his beard, the thoughtful set of his brow. In the weeks since he had found her in the snow, he had transformed in her eyes from a frightening stranger to a reluctant host to something far more complex. A partner, perhaps. Someone who understood her in ways Harrison never had, who saw value in her beyond her ability to bear children or maintain a proper household. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting to know such understanding was possible. Terrifying to recognize the growing attachment she felt toward a man still haunted by his dead wife. A man whose life was as precarious and uncertain as her own. Shadow stirred beside her, whimpering softly in his sleep. Abigail stroked his fur soothingly, wondering what dreams visited a young wolf separated from his pack. Did he run through snow-covered forests, hunt with siblings he would never see again? Or was he, like her, adapting to a new reality, finding strength and connection in unexpected places? Across the fire, Ethan's eyes met hers, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They were both fugitives, both damaged by loss and betrayal. But here, in this ancient place where Clara had once worked her healing magic, perhaps they could find not just a remedy for physical disease, but a balm for wounded spirits as well. Outside, the winter wind howled through the pines, carrying with it the distant calls of Miller's men, still searching. But for this moment, in the warm glow of dying embers, Abigail felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope, fragile but persistent, like a ghost flower blooming in the depths of winter. Morning light filtered through the ice curtain at the cave entrance, casting prismatic rainbows across the stone walls. Abigail woke to find Shadow already alert, his amber eyes fixed on something deeper in the cave system. Following his gaze, she spotted a faint glow emanating from one of the connecting tunnels. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Ethan, who slept nearby, his face momentarily peaceful in repose. Shadow limped to her side as she approached the tunnel, his injured paw held gingerly above the ground, but his curiosity evidently overcoming his discomfort. The tunnel widened into a chamber where a natural skylight allowed sunshine to penetrate from above. In that single shaft of light, growing from a crack in the stone floor, was a cluster of the white flowers from her dream. Delicate blooms with luminous petals surrounding golden centers that seemed to capture and amplify the sunlight. "Ghost flowers," she whispered, kneeling beside them. Shadow sniffed at the blooms cautiously, then looked up at her as if awaiting instruction. "You found them." Abigail startled at Ethan's voice behind her. He stood at the chamber entrance, his expression a mixture of wonder and scientific curiosity. "Shadow led me here," she explained, gesturing to the wolf pup who had settled beside the flowers as if standing guard. Ethan approached slowly, crouching to examine the blooms without touching them. "The Arapaho believe these flowers grow only where the spirit world touches our own. They're used in their most sacred medicines." He glanced at Abigail. "Your dreams showed you these exact flowers?" She nodded. Clara said they were the final ingredient in her fever remedy, that they only grow where the veil between worlds is thin. "The exact phrase the Arapaho use," Ethan murmured, clearly impressed despite his scientific skepticism. He reached into his pack, extracting a small leather pouch. "We should harvest some, but carefully. According to tradition, we must leave the roots in at least one bloom to ensure they return." Together they gathered several of the ghost flowers, working in reverent silence. As Abigail carefully placed the last bloom in Ethan's pouch, a sense of rightness settled over her, as if she was fulfilling a destiny set in motion long before her birth. "Now what?" she asked, securing the precious pouch in her own pack. "Now we need a proper laboratory to prepare the remedy," Ethan replied, his practical nature reasserting itself. "We have all the ingredients, but Clara's notes suggest specific preparation methods that require equipment I don't have here. So we need to return to civilization." Abigail didn't phrase it as a question. They both knew this moment would come, when hiding in the wilderness would no longer serve their purpose. Ethan nodded grimly. "Whispering Pines is the closest settlement with what we need, but it's also the most dangerous place for both of us. Unless," Abigail said slowly, an idea forming, "Miller was telling the truth about Harrison being arrested." "A trap," Ethan reminded her. "Perhaps, but what if it's not? What if the bank fraud was discovered? It would explain why Harrison has become so desperate to find me, not just for the remedy, but to silence me before I can testify against him." Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful. Even if Harrison is truly in custody, Judge Porter and Dr. Fletcher remain allies, and they know we're in these mountains. "Then we don't enter town openly," Abigail decided, a plan crystallizing in her mind. "There's an abandoned trapper's cabin at the edge of Whispering Pines. It belonged to old Jacob Winters before he died last spring. It would have basic equipment, a stove, containers, enough to prepare the remedy if we bring the right supplies from town. How would we obtain those supplies without being seen?" Abigail smiled slightly. "Sarah Wilkins, Josephine's maid who wrote to you. She used to purchase herbs from my grandmother occasionally. She might help us." Ethan weighed the risks, clearly torn between the danger of returning to civilization and the urgent need to prepare the remedy before the epidemic claimed more lives. Finally, he nodded. "We'll need to move quickly and stay hidden. If Harrison's men spot us—" "They won't," Abigail said with more confidence than she felt. "We'll travel at night, approach from the east where the forest comes closest to town." By dusk, they had gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the sanctuary of the cave. Shadow, who had grown noticeably stronger during their brief respite, insisted on walking rather than being carried, though he still favored his injured paw. Remarkable recovery, Ethan observed, watching the wolf pup navigate the rocky terrain with determined steps. Almost unnatural for an injury that severe. Abigail had noticed it too. The wound was healing at an accelerated rate, the torn flesh knitting together far faster than expected. Perhaps there's something special about him. The Arapaho might say he has strong medicine. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but didn't dismiss the idea outright. Another small indication of how his rigid scientific worldview was gradually expanding through their shared experiences. They traveled through the night, guided by moonlight and Ethan's intimate knowledge of the mountain paths. By dawn, they had reached the foothills, the lights of whispering pines visible in the distance. They made camp in a dense thicket, resting through the day to prepare for their nighttime approach to town. As dusk approached once more, Abigail found herself increasingly anxious. It had been nearly a month since she fled Whispering Pines, yet returning felt like stepping back into a cage she had only narrowly escaped. "We could still turn back," Ethan offered, noticing her tension as they packed up their small camp. "Find another way." "No," she said firmly. "People are dying. Clara wouldn't have run from this responsibility, and neither will I." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "You're more like her than you realize. The Arapaho were right to call you her heir." The simple words bolstered Abigail's courage. She checked Shadow's bandage one last time. The wolf pup would remain hidden in the trapper's cabin while they ventured into town, and then they set off toward Whispering Pines under cover of gathering darkness. The town appeared different as they approached from the eastern forest, smaller somehow than in Abigail's memory. Lights glowed in windows, but the streets were largely deserted. No music spilled from the saloon, no voices called greetings across the main thoroughfare. The silence was eerie, unnatural. "The epidemic," Ethan murmured as they skirted the town's edge, keeping to shadows. "People are staying home, avoiding contact." They reached Jacob Winter's abandoned cabin without incident, finding it dusty but structurally sound. Ethan quickly assessed its potential as a temporary laboratory, while Abigail settled Shadow in a nest of old blankets they discovered in a trunk. "I'll go to the porterhouse," Abigail decided, pulling her shawl over her head to obscure her face. "Sarah should be there, especially if Josephine is ill." "It's too dangerous," Ethan protested. "You're the one Harrison's men are primarily searching for. And you're the trained physician who needs to prepare the remedy," she countered. "If one of us is caught, it should be me. You're the one who can actually save lives with this knowledge." Their eyes locked in silent battle of wills. Finally, Ethan conceded with a reluctant nod. "2 hours. If you're not back by then, I'm coming after you." The walk into town was the most terrifying journey of Abigail's life, far more frightening than her flight through the winter forest. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat, every distant voice a potential discovery. She kept her head down, her pace deliberate but unhurried, trying to project the demeanor of a servant on a late errand rather than a fugitive. The porterhouse stood on the north end of town, a stately 2-story home with columns flanking the entrance and carefully tended gardens, now dormant under winter snow. Rather than approaching the front, Abigail circled to the servants' entrance at the rear. She knocked softly, heart pounding against her ribs. After an agonizing moment, the door creaked open to reveal a young woman with dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her plain face tightened with suspicion. "Who calls at this hour?" she demanded. "Sarah Wilkins?" Abigail kept her voice low. "I come about your letter to Dr. Blackwood." The maid's eyes widened in recognition, darting past Abigail to check for observers before quickly ushering her inside. "Mrs. Reed, we'd heard you were in the mountains. The master has men searching everywhere." "Judge Porter is still having me hunted?" Abigail asked, confused. "Even with the sickness in town?" Sarah's expression grew troubled. "It's complicated, ma'am, and the judge himself took ill 3 days ago. He's been raving with fever, speaking of things that make little sense. But before he fell ill, he was most insistent about finding you." "And Josephine? Your letter said she was sick." "She improves, thank the Lord. Dr. Fletcher's treatment seemed to help, though she remains weak." Sarah hesitated. "She's been asking for you, ma'am. Says there are things you must know." Alarm prickled along Abigail's spine. "I can't stay long. Dr. Blackwood and I have found what we believe is your grandmother's remedy, but we need equipment and supplies to prepare it. Sarah's face lit with hope. A cure, truly? The sickness has taken 12 souls already, with more failing each day. She squared her shoulders with sudden determination. Tell me what you need, Mrs. Reed. I'll help however I can. Abigail quickly listed the items Ethan had specified: a spirit lamp, glass containers, specific chemicals available at the apothecary, fresh water, clean cloths. Sarah nodded at each item, mentally cataloging where they might be obtained at this late hour. Most of these things I can find here in the house, she said. For the rest, I'll need perhaps an hour. Where shall I bring them? Jacob Winter's old cabin east of town, Abigail instructed. But Sarah, you mustn't tell anyone, not even Josephine yet. If Harrison's allies learn where we are. I understand, ma'am. Sarah's expression hardened. Mr. Reed may be in jail, but he still has friends in town, powerful ones. The confirmation that Harrison was indeed imprisoned sent a wave of vindication through Abigail, quickly tempered by Sarah's next words. Though the charges may not stick, there's talk that evidence is disappearing, witnesses changing their stories. She shook her head in disgust. Money speaks loudly in Whispering Pines, as you well know. Is there anything else I should know before I go? Abigail asked, acutely aware of time passing. Ethan would be growing anxious. Sarah hesitated, then spoke in a rushed whisper. There's something strange about this sickness, ma'am. It's not just killing people, it's making them speak secrets. In their fever dreams, they confess things, terrible things sometimes. Fever often causes delirium, Abigail said, though something in Sarah's tone gave her pause. It's more than that. Judge Porter spoke of your grandmother, said he was there when they drove her out, said he helped hide the truth about what really happened during the epidemic. Sarah crossed herself, a superstitious gesture at odds with her practical demeanor. He keeps saying the maple leaf knows over and over. A chill ran through Abigail despite the warm kitchen. I have to go. Bring the supplies as soon as you can. She slipped back into the night, her mind racing with this new information. Judge Porter had been involved in Clara's expulsion from the territory, had helped conceal something about the epidemic. And what did he mean by the maple leaf knows? The walk back to Winter's cabin seemed to take an eternity, each shadow more menacing than before. When she finally recited the door, Ethan yanked it open before she could knock, his face tight with worry. You're late, he said by way of greeting, pulling her inside and quickly securing the door. I was about to come looking for you. I'm sorry, there was more to learn than I expected. She quickly relayed what Sarah had told her. Harrison's imprisonment, Judge Porter's illness, and fever confessions. The promise of supplies within the hour. Ethan absorbed this information with a deepening frown. Porter was involved in driving Clara away? That adds another dimension to this mystery. And what could the maple leaf nose mean, Abigail wondered, absently touching her pendant. Perhaps that Clara documented whatever happened, whatever they're trying to hide. Ethan began clearing space on the cabin's small table, preparing it for use as a work surface. Did Sarah confirm how many are ill? What the progression of symptoms looks like? 12 dead already, with more falling ill daily, Abigail reported grimly. She didn't detail the symptoms, but mentioned that fever dreams are causing people to reveal secrets. Interesting, Ethan murmured. That aligns with reports from other outbreaks. The fever seems to lower inhibitions similar to certain drugs or alcohol, but more profound. Shadow greeted Abigail with a soft whine, limping over to press against her legs. She stroked his fur, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Do you think Clara's remedy will work against this variant of the disease? We have to hope so, Ethan replied, his expression resolute. If not, we'll adapt it based on what we observe. Between your grandmother's knowledge and modern medical understanding, we have a fighting chance. An hour later, Sarah arrived with a heavily laden basket containing most of what they had requested. The apothecary was closed, she apologized, but I found everything else, and I brought food. You both look half-starved. You're taking a significant risk helping us, Ethan said, examining the supplies with approval. If anyone saw you coming here. No one did, Sarah assured him. The streets are empty after dark now. People are afraid. She knelt to pet Shadow, who surprisingly allowed the attention. A wolf pup? Unusual companion. He found us in a manner of speaking, Abigail explained, unpacking the basket. Sarah, is there any way to get a message to Josephine to let her know we're here and working on the remedy? The maid considered this. I could tell her privately. She's weak but lucid. The master is too ill to notice visitors to her chamber. Tell her we have all the ingredients, including the ghost flower, Ethan instructed. She'll understand the significance, and ask if she has any of Clara's original notes, anything that might help us prepare the remedy correctly. Sarah promised to return the following evening with any information Josephine could provide. After she departed, Ethan and Abigail set to work preparing what they could with the available supplies. We'll need to distill the ghost flowers first, Ethan explained, setting up the spirit lamp. According to Arapaho tradition, they must be prepared under moonlight. Scientifically meaningless, but Clara followed these traditions for a reason, Abigail finished for him, even if Western medicine doesn't understand why. They worked through the night, Ethan's medical precision complementing Abigail's intuitive understanding of herbal preparations. By dawn, they had created a base tincture that would form the foundation of the remedy. Now it needs to steep for 12 hours, Ethan said, carefully sealing the glass container and placing it near the window where moonlight had given way to the first rays of sun. After that, we add the secondary ingredients and prepare the final mixture. Exhausted, they took turns sleeping through the day, one always keeping watch while the other rested. Shadow proved an excellent sentinel, his keen senses alerting them to approaching footsteps long before they would have heard them themselves. Twice, searchers passed near the cabin, men's voices discussing bounties and search patterns, but none approached the seemingly abandoned structure. Still, the close calls left them on edge, acutely aware of their vulnerable position. As evening approached again, Ethan checked the tincture, nodding with satisfaction at its amber clarity. It's ready for the next stage. We'll need fresh water, the cleanest available. There's a spring behind the cabin, Abigail recalled. Jacob was proud of its purity, said it was why he built here. She slipped outside with a container, moving carefully in the gathering dusk. The spring bubbled up from between rocks a short distance into the trees, its water indeed crystal clear. As she filled their container, a twig snapped nearby. Abigail froze, her heart leaping to her throat. Slowly she turned toward the sound, expecting to see one of Harrison's hired men. Instead, a familiar figure emerged from the trees. Thomas Miller, the trapper who had called to them in the forest. "Evening, Mrs. Reed," he said quietly, making no move to come closer or to call out to others. "Thought I might find you here eventually." "Mr. Miller," Abigail straightened, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Have you come to collect Harrison's bounty?" Something like shame crossed the trapper's weathered face. "No, ma'am, I've come to warn you. Reed's being released tomorrow. Evidence against him has mysteriously vanished from Judge Porter's office. Once he's free, he'll double his efforts to find you." Abigail studied him warily. "Why tell me this? Why not simply capture me now and claim your reward?" Miller removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture of genuine discomfort. "My sister took sick 3 days ago. Doc Fletcher's treatments aren't helping. Word is you and Blackwood might have a cure." He met her gaze directly. "I'd rather have my sister alive than Reed's money in my pocket." "How did you find us?" "Tracked you from the mountains. Lost your trail a few times. Blackwood knows his business, but I've been hunting these woods since I was a boy." He gestured toward the cabin. This was the logical place to look. Isolated but close to town, with basic amenities. Abigail made a swift decision. "If your sister is ill, bring her here after dark tomorrow. We should have the remedy prepared by then." "But Miller, if this is a trap—" "It's not, ma'am, I swear it." He replaced his hat. "I'll keep your location secret. Just help my sister if you can." After he departed, Abigail hurried back to the cabin, relating the unexpected encounter to Ethan. "Can he be trusted?" Ethan asked, concern evident in his expression. "I'm not certain," Abigail admitted, "but if his sister is truly ill, and we can help her—" She sighed, setting down the water container. "Clara wouldn't have turned away someone in need, regardless of the risk." "No, she wouldn't have," Ethan agreed softly. "And neither will we." They resumed their work, adding the fresh spring water and other ingredients to the base tincture. As midnight approached, Ethan carefully heated the mixture over the spirit lamp. watching as it changed from amber to a deep, rich burgundy. "It's ready," he announced finally, allowing the liquid to cool before transferring it to smaller vials. If Clara's notes in the Arapaho traditions are correct, this should combat the infection and reduce fever within hours of administration. "How many doses do we have?" Abigail asked, counting the filled vials. 20, perhaps 30, if we're conservative with the dosage. Ethan's expression was grave. "Not enough if the epidemic continues to spread." "Then we'll make more," Abigail said with determination. "The ghost flowers still grow in the cave. We can harvest more, prepare another batch." Their discussion was interrupted by a soft knock at the door, Sarah returning as promised. Her face was flushed with excitement as she entered. "Mistress Porter is much improved," she reported. "She sent this for you." From her basket, she withdrew a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. It was hidden in a secret compartment in her writing desk. "She says it contains Clara Harlow's original notes from the epidemic." Ethan accepted the journal with reverence, carefully opening its fragile cover. Inside, in Clara's precise handwriting, were detailed accounts of the epidemic, recipes for remedies, and observations of patients' responses to different treatments. "This is incredible," he murmured, turning pages with growing excitement. "Far more detailed than anything I've found in my research." But it was Abigail who discovered the most shocking revelation, in entries near the journal's end. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud from a page dated shortly before Clara's departure from the territory. "Judge Porter came today, not as an official, but as a desperate father. His son William has fallen ill, despite all their precautions. The irony is bitter. The same man who publicly denounced my methods as witchcraft now begs for my help in secret. I will treat the boy, of course. A child should not suffer for his father's pride or prejudice." And then, a later entry, "William Porter recovers, thanks be to God and the ghost flower remedy. His father's gratitude manifests strangely, with a warning to leave the territory immediately. He claims certain powerful men blame me for the epidemic itself, that my foreign methods in association with the Arapaho have marked me as dangerous. I cannot risk staying. The maple leaf pendant I leave in trust with Josephine Walker, who has shown more courage than her fiancé. May it find its way to my Abigail when the time is right." "Josephine Walker," Abigail breathed. Josephine Porter's maiden name. She was engaged to Judge Porter when she knew Clara. And she's had the pendant all these years, Ethan realized, waiting for the right moment to pass it to you. Sarah nodded, her expression solemn. "Mistress Porter instructed me to tell you that she did not give the pendant directly to you upon your arrival in Whispering Pines, because she feared her husband would recognize it. She arranged for it to be delivered as a wedding gift instead, with no card identifying the giver." "So Porter drove Clara away after she saved his son," Abigail said bitterly, "and now, 30 years later, he's dying of a similar disease." "There's more," Sarah added hesitantly. "Mistress Porter believes her husband's fever confessions suggest he and others deliberately suppressed Clara's remedy after she left, prevented its distribution to those who continued to fall ill." "Why would they do such a thing?" Abigail demanded, horrified. "Money," Ethan surmised, his expression hardening. "Control. If the only effective treatment came from the official doctors—" "Hundreds died in that epidemic," Abigail whispered. "Hundreds who might have been saved." The weight of this revelation settled over them like a shroud. Clara had been driven away not just from superstition or prejudice, but as part of a deliberate effort to maintain medical authority and profits in the hands of men like Dr. Fletcher and his predecessors. "History will not repeat itself," Ethan declared, his voice steely with resolve. "This remedy will be available to all who need it, regardless of station or background." Sarah departed with 5 vials of the precious remedy, 2 for Josephine to continue her recovery, 1 for Judge Porter, despite his past actions, and 2 for other household members showing early symptoms. "Miller will bring his sister tomorrow night," Abigail told her. "If the remedy works as we hope, word will spread quickly. We'll need to prepare more." "And then what?" Sarah asked practically. "You can't stay here indefinitely, especially once Harrison is released." It was the question they had both been avoiding. What came after? Could they return to the mountains? Would they be perpetually hunted? Or was there another path, one that allowed them to use their combined knowledge to help others openly? One step at a time, Ethan said, though the concern in his eyes belied his measured tone. First, we save those we can. Then we decide our next move. After Sarah left, they secured the remaining vials of remedy and took stock of their supplies. They would need to venture into town again soon for more materials if they were to produce another batch. Shadow had settled by the door, his posture alert, ears pricked toward the night beyond their shelter. In the 2 weeks since they had rescued him, he had grown noticeably, his puppy softness giving way to leaner muscle, his movements more confident despite his still healing paw. He seems to sense something, Abigail observed, joining Ethan by the single window that overlooked the path to town. In the moonlight, they could see a figure approaching, not Sarah returning, nor Miller with his sister, but a lone woman walking with deliberate steps despite obvious weakness. As she drew closer, Ethan inhaled sharply. "Josephine Porter," he murmured in disbelief. "What is she doing here? She's still recovering. She shouldn't be out of bed." Abigail quickly opened the door, ushering the older woman inside. Josephine Porter was pale, her aristocratic features drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with urgent purpose. "Forgive the intrusion," she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "But there was no time to send Sarah. Harrison Reed has been released early. He's gathering men at the saloon right now, offering triple the bounty for information on your whereabouts." "How did he know to look here?" Ethan demanded, helping Josephine to the cabin's single chair. "I fear Sarah was followed when she returned to our house," Josephine replied grimly. "One of Reed's men was lurking near the servants' entrance. She didn't see him, but I did from my window." Abigail and Ethan exchanged alarmed glances. If Harrison knew their location, they had minutes at most before he and his men arrived. "We have to go," Abigail said, already gathering the precious vials of remedy. "Back to the mountains, perhaps." "No," Josephine interjected firmly. "That's exactly what Reed wants. To drive you away, discredit you as fugitives. There's another way." She drew a sealed envelope from her sleeve. "This contains my husband's confession, written in a moment of lucidity between fever spikes. He admits his role in suppressing Clara's remedy 30 years ago, and his knowledge of Harrison's fraudulent banking practices." "Why would Porter incriminate himself?" Ethan asked skeptically. "Because he's dying," Josephine said simply. "The remedy came too late for him. He knows it and seeks what peace he can find through truth." Her gaze turned to Abigail. "He also admits that he and Reed deliberately arranged your marriage, hoping to gain control of any remedies or knowledge you might have inherited from Clara." The confirmation of what Abigail had begun to suspect still landed like a physical blow. Her entire marriage had been a calculated scheme, not just Harrison's, but a conspiracy extending back to Judge Porter and who knew how many others. "What do you propose we do with this confession?" Ethan asked, taking the envelope with careful hands. "Take it to Edward Holloway at the Territorial Gazette," Josephine instructed. "He's no friend of Reed's or my husband's. He'll publish it without hesitation, especially with proof that your remedy works." "And that will be enough to stop Harrison?" Abigail was dubious. "He has powerful friends, influence." "Not as much as he once did," Josephine countered. "The epidemic has changed things. People are frightened, desperate for help. When they learn that effective treatment was deliberately withheld once before, and that you offer it freely now." She let the implication hang in the air. Shadow suddenly growled, a low warning sound directed at the door. Outside, they heard the crunch of multiple footsteps approaching. "Too late," Ethan muttered, reaching for his rifle. "They're here." Josephine rose from her chair with surprising agility for a woman recently ill. "The back door. Quickly. I'll delay them." "They'll recognize you," Abigail protested. "Your reputation." "My reputation matters far less than atoning for my silence 30 years ago," Josephine said firmly. "I stood by while Clara was driven away. I will not make the same mistake with her granddaughter." There was no time for further argument. Gathering the remedy vials, Clara's journal, and the confession, Ethan and Abigail slipped out the back door, Shadow limping determinedly at their heels. As they disappeared into the trees, they heard Harrison Reed's voice at the cabin's front entrance, and Josephine Porter's calm response claiming she had come alone to pray in solitude. "To the newspaper office," Ethan decided as they hurried through the darkness. "It's our best chance now." The streets of Whispering Pines were no longer deserted. Harrison's bounty had drawn men out despite the late hour, some armed, all searching for the fugitive Mrs. Reed and her companion. Keeping to alleys and shadows, Abigail, Ethan, and Shadow made their way toward the Territorial Gazette's modest building at the far end of the main street. Almost there, Ethan whispered, as they paused in an alley across from their destination. When I give the signal, run directly for the front door. I'll be right behind you. Abigail clutched the precious vials and documents to her chest, heart pounding. This was it, the moment when they would either succeed in exposing the truth or be captured trying. She thought of Clara, driven from her home for daring to heal those in need, of Rebecca, dying because medical convention valued tradition over innovation, of the Arapaho, whose knowledge had been dismissed as primitive superstition by men like Porter and Fletcher. Ready, she whispered, determination hardening her resolve. Shadow pressed against her legs, his amber eyes gleaming with what seemed like understanding. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The doctor who had lost everything, the woman who had discovered her true worth, and the wolf who had found a new pack. The street before them lay momentarily empty, bathed in moonlight, a silver path toward truth, toward justice, toward whatever future awaited them beyond this night of reckoning. Now, Ethan whispered, squeezing her shoulder. Abigail darted across the moonlit street, clutching the precious documents against her chest, Shadow limping determinedly at her heels. The few seconds it took to reach the newspaper office felt like an eternity, each footfall echoing loudly in her ears. Behind her she heard Ethan's steady footsteps, a reassuring presence guarding her back. The door to the Territorial Gazette was locked, as expected at this late hour. Abigail pounded on it frantically, glancing over her shoulder at the still empty street. "Mr. Holloway," she called, trying to keep her voice urgent but not loud enough to alert others. "Mr. Holloway, please." A light appeared in an upstairs window, the editor's private quarters above the newspaper office. Moments later, a disheveled Edward Holloway, spectacles askew and suspenders hanging loose over his shirt, peered cautiously through the door's small window. Recognition dawned in his expression as he caught sight of Abigail. The lock clicked, and the door opened just wide enough to admit them. "Mrs. Reed?" Holloway's bushy eyebrows shot up in surprise, even more so when Shadow slipped in behind her. "Good heavens! You're the talk of the territory. Harrison Reed has half the town out looking for you." "Mr. Holloway," Ethan said, securing the door behind them, "we have information you'll want to publish immediately. Lives depend on it." In the editor's cluttered office, illuminated by oil lamps hastily lit, they laid out the evidence. Judge Porter's confession, Clara's journal detailing her remedy and its deliberate suppression 30 years ago, and the vials of medicine that could save the town from the epidemic. Holloway read the documents with increasing amazement, his journalistic instincts clearly recognizing the magnitude of what he was being shown. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, removing his spectacles to polish them nervously. "You realize publishing this will destroy some of the most powerful men in the territory? Judge Porter, Dr. Fletcher, even if Reed is already compromised." "People are dying, Mr. Holloway," Abigail said firmly. "They died 30 years ago when this remedy was suppressed, and they're dying now. The truth must be told." The editor studied her face, then Ethan's, then nodded decisively. "My press can have a special edition ready by morning, but you two should not be here when it circulates. Reed's men will come looking." "We have one more task before we can leave," Ethan explained. "The remedy must be distributed to those who need it most. We have enough doses for the critically ill, but we'll need to produce more." Holloway thought for a moment, then said, "My sister runs the boarding house on Pine Street. It's become a makeshift hospital of sorts, as the proper infirmary is overflowing. Take your medicine there. Martha will ensure it reaches those in need." As they prepared to leave, Holloway held up a hand. "Wait, let me take your photograph." Seeing their alarmed expressions, he added, "For the story. People should see the faces of those who brought them salvation when their so-called leaders failed them." After a moment's hesitation, Abigail and Ethan agreed. They stood together before Holloway's camera, Shadow at their feet, a strange trio united by circumstance and purpose. The flash powder ignited with a bright burst, capturing their image for posterity. History will remember this night, Holloway said as he escorted them to a back exit. Whatever happens next, the truth will be known. By noon the following day, special editions of the Territorial Gazette were being passed from hand to hand throughout Whispering Pines. The headline blazed across the front page in the largest type Holloway possessed. Epidemic cure suppressed. Judge Porter confesses 30-year conspiracy. Beneath it was the photograph of Abigail and Ethan, captioned, Clara Harlow's granddaughter returns with life-saving remedy. When the story detailed Judge Porter's deathbed confession, Harrison Reed's fraudulent banking practices, and the deliberate campaign to discredit Clara Harlow's effective treatment 3 decades earlier. Most importantly, it provided clear instructions for where the sick could receive the remedy and how more was being produced. From their vantage point in Sarah Wilkins' attic, where they had taken refuge after delivering the medicine to Martha Holloway's boarding house, Abigail and Ethan watched the town's reaction unfold. People gathered in the streets despite the risk of contagion, reading aloud from the newspaper to those who couldn't. It's working, Sarah reported when she brought them lunch. Martha's boarding house is crowded with the sick seeking treatment, and those who received doses last night are already showing improvement. And Harrison? Ethan asked. Sarah's expression darkened. He stormed into the newspaper office at dawn, but Holloway was prepared with armed typesetters. When Reed drew his pistol, they subdued him. He's back in jail, along with Dr. Fletcher, who tried to destroy the remaining vials of remedy at the boarding house. Josephine, what? Abigail inquired anxiously. Safe. Her husband passed during the night, but not before signing his confession. With him gone and the truth published, she's finally free of her silence. Sarah smiled slightly. She's helping at the boarding house, actually. Says it's time she followed Clara's example rather than standing by. Over the next 3 days, they remained hidden while continuing to produce more of the remedy using supplies Sarah smuggled to them. The epidemic's tide began to turn. Fewer new cases reported, those treated showing remarkable recovery rates. Dr. Helena Montgomery, who had arrived from Denver to assist with the epidemic, documented the remedy's effects with scientific precision. The results defy conventional explanation, she reported to Abigail and Ethan. Patients on the brink of death show improvement within hours. Fever reduces within 3 hours of administration. The distinctive skin lesions begin to fade by the second day. By the third day, most patients can take food and water normally. What fascinated Dr. Montgomery most was the remedy's efficacy regardless of the patient's age, gender, or race. Standard treatments often work differently depending on the individual, she explained. But this remedy seems universally effective, with only minor adjustments needed for body weight. Even more remarkable were the cases where patients had been declared hopeless by Dr. Fletcher. Martha Holloway kept meticulous records at the boarding house. Of the 37 critical cases who received the remedy in the first wave, 35 recovered completely. The remaining 2, both elderly with underlying conditions, showed significant improvement before eventually succumbing. It's not just medicine, Martha told Abigail privately. There's something about knowing it came from Clara Harlow's work, someone the establishment rejected, that gives people hope, and hope itself can be powerful medicine. On the 4th day, a surprising visitor arrived at their hiding place. Thomas Miller, the trapper, accompanied by a young woman with his same weathered features, but a gentler expression. My sister Eliza, he introduced her. Your remedy saved her life. Eliza Miller curtsied awkwardly. I've come to help, if you'll have me. I was training as a nurse before Father died, and I had to return home. With Eliza's assistance, they established a proper production method for the remedy, documenting each step meticulously. So it will never be lost again, Abigail explained. By the week's end, news arrived that transformed their situation entirely. A federal marshal had come to Whispering Pines, drawn by reports of the epidemic and the scandal surrounding Judge Porter and Harrison Reed. After reviewing the evidence, he had formally charged Reed with fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Dr. Fletcher, facing similar charges, had fled in the night. The marshal wants to speak with you both, Sarah told them, not to arrest you, to thank you, and to offer protection. The meeting took place in what had been Judge Porter's office, now temporarily occupied by Marshal James Hargrove, a tall man with an imposing mustache but kind eyes. Mrs. Reed, Dr. Blackwood, he greeted them, rising from behind the desk. Or perhaps I should say Mrs. Harlow, as I understand you've petitioned to reclaim your family name. Abigail nodded, still wary despite the man's friendly demeanor. I've reviewed this entire situation, the marshal continued. The conspiracy against your grandmother, the suppression of her remedy, Reed's machinations. He shook his head in disgust. A shameful chapter in this territory's history. But what concerns me now is ensuring such a thing never happens again. He laid a document on the desk. The governor has authorized me to offer you both official positions. The territory needs a proper medical authority, one that respects both traditional knowledge and modern science. We're establishing a territorial health commission, and we'd like you to lead it. Ethan and Abigail exchanged stunned glances. Both of us? Ethan asked carefully. Dr. Blackwood, your medical license has been fully reinstated based on evidence that your techniques were sound and the testimony against you fraudulent. The marshal smiled. And Mrs. Harlow, your knowledge of herbal remedies and your grandmother's work makes you uniquely qualified. Together, you represent exactly the balanced approach to medicine this territory needs. The offer was beyond anything they could have imagined. Not just exoneration, but recognition, purpose, the chance to ensure Clara's knowledge would benefit generations to come. We'll need time to consider, Abigail said, though her heart was already answering yes. Of course, but don't take too long. The marshal's expression grew serious. Reports of this epidemic are spreading. Other territories are requesting information about your remedy. People need you. 1 year later, spring had transformed the Wyoming landscape, painting the once snow-covered mountains with wildflowers and fresh greenery. From the porch of their new home, a comfortable cabin built where Ethan's original shelter had stood, Abigail watched Shadow racing along the tree line. No longer a wounded pup, but a magnificent young wolf, he patrolled the boundaries of what he clearly considered his territory, though he returned each night to sleep by their hearth. The last batch is cooling, Ethan announced, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. 30 more vials ready for distribution tomorrow. Abigail accepted the coffee gratefully, leaning slightly against his shoulder, a casual intimacy that still felt new and precious. Josephine's letter said cases in Montana are already decreasing. The remedy is working there too. Clara would be proud, Ethan said softly, his free arm encircling her waist, of everything you've accomplished. The past year had been one of remarkable transformation. The Territorial Health Commission, headquartered in a newly constructed building in Whispering Pines, had become a model for integrating traditional healing knowledge with medical science. Physicians from as far as Boston came to study their methods, while Arapaho healers shared their wisdom without fear of persecution. Harrison Reed had been sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. Dr. Fletcher, eventually captured in Denver, faced similar punishment. Josephine Porter had transformed her home into a school for young women, with a special emphasis on scientific and medical education. So no girl's talents will be suppressed again, as she wrote in her prospectus. Most meaningful to Abigail was the small cemetery plot now properly maintained in Whispering Pines, where a headstone honored Clara Harlow as healer visionary whose wisdom saved many. Clara's body wasn't there. No one knew where she had ultimately been laid to rest, but her legacy had finally found its rightful place. The ghost flowers are blooming in the cave again, Abigail remarked, fingering the silver maple leaf pendant that now hung alongside a gold band on a chain around her neck. We should harvest them soon. Their wedding 3 months earlier had been a small affair. Josephine, Sarah, the Millers, and a delegation from the Arapaho tribe as witnesses. Shadow had carried the rings, tied to a small pouch around his neck, trotting solemnly down the aisle before resuming his usual dignity. I've been thinking, Ethan said, his voice taking on the careful tone he used when proposing something significant, about Rebecca's research on disease prevention. With what we've learned from Clara's methods, perhaps we could develop not just treatments, but preventative measures. Abigail smiled, turning to face him fully. I've been thinking the same thing, and she hesitated, then placed her free hand over her abdomen in a gesture both ancient and unmistakable. Ethan's eyes widened, his coffee cup nearly slipping from his grasp. Are you certain? She nodded, joy bubbling up within her. 2 months now. Dr. Helena confirmed it yesterday. The look of wonder that transformed his face was everything she could have hoped for. Setting aside his cup, he gathered her in his arms, his kiss conveying what words could not: gratitude, joy, the healing of old wounds. When they finally separated, both a little breathless, Ethan placed his hand gently over hers. Boy or girl, they'll know both worlds, science and tradition, reason and intuition. Like the maple leaf, Abigail agreed, a bridge between worlds. In the distance, Shadow raised his head and howled, not in warning but in what seemed like celebration, as if he too understood that their unlikely family was growing, that life persisted despite all attempts to constrain it. As twilight settled over the mountains, Abigail and Ethan remained on the porch, watching the first stars appear, their hands intertwined. The silver maple leaf pendant caught the fading light, a symbol of all they had endured and overcome. Rejection transformed to acceptance, isolation to connection, loss to renewal. Clara's legacy lived on, not just in the remedy that had saved so many lives, but in the courage to stand firm when society demanded conformity, to value wisdom regardless of its source, to recognize that true healing embraced both the measurable and the mysterious. These were the gifts Abigail would pass to her child, along with the silver pendant that had guided her home to herself. The wilderness had called, and she had answered, not with surrender, but with strength, not with fear, but with love. And in that response, she had found not just survival, but a life of purpose, passion, and profound joy.